Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about student-led efforts to protect and preserve tigers. Sean Carnell is the national coordinator of Tigers for Tigers, a group that works to protect tigers around the world. Sean is a 2013 graduate of Clemson University and a consultant for the National Wildlife Refuge Association. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we're delighted you could be here.
Thanks.
Well, maybe if we could start with, how did you become interested in tigers in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you ever go to Clemson University, we are diehard Tiger fans. 80,000 people in our football stadium. We have paw prints printed on highways. And what I noticed was, there's a big disconnect between the passion and affinity that we have for tigers on the football field versus tigers in the wild. Growing up for me, wildlife was always of interest of mine, and I had a pleasure of an opportunity of actually going to see tigers in the wild through my college experience, and that one I was like, oh my gosh, these are magnificent, beautiful animals that really need our attention and need our help. And through that and becoming involved in a club at Clemson University called Tigers for Tigers, that's what really sparked my interest in getting involved.
Well, fair enough. And what is Tigers for Tigers?
Yeah, Tigers for Tigers, we try to do two things. One of which is to provide students, college students, with opportunities outside of the classroom to develop student leadership skills and provide them with opportunities that will help them build a potential career outside of the curriculum within colleges. But at the same time, utilize this affinity that we have for tigers and for our mascot that represents our legacy, our history, and our passion for these animals, and do active things for conservation, whether that's through educational opportunities, awareness programs, supporting policy reform efforts, and others.
And what would be an example of some awareness campaigns that you might work on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've done a variety of different things. We just recently held a National Tiger Skit, which is a really cool joint collaboration between Clemson University and Trinity, where we had our mascot dress up and run around campus in high traffic areas, being chased by a student dressed up in a poacher outfit, which brought attention to the fact that the tigers are endangered, and we provided opportunities for students to take action on social media platforms to become engaged in that conversation.
Well, I've thought about this a little bit. So there are students who are doing all these efforts to promote awareness, but how does that change what's going on the ground? Because my understanding is that tigers are endangered because of economic issues, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. Tigers are facing a tremendous amount of pressure due to economic issues. And there's a variety of other political obstacles too. So through Tigers for Tigers and initially just getting students involved in the conversation, we can transfer that energy by doing fundraising campaigns where we can send funds directly to conservation organizations on the ground within tiger range countries that can have more of a greater effect on these economic and political concerns in other countries.
Fair enough. And what would a tiger conservation group in India do?
Yeah, well, there's we have a great relationship with an organization called Tiger Trust, and what they do is they provide capacity building programs where they go and visit villagers within local areas surrounding national tiger parks and educate them about the role of wildlife within their community. Other things that they do is train forest guards and ensure that there's alternative sources of livelihood within surrounding communities that can still support tiger conservation efforts. But also there's research too, so a lot of other NGOs, non-governmental organizations, get involved in research too, as well, to get a better understanding of what's going on with tigers.
And how many tigers are there in the world right now?
3,200, which is pretty low. I mean, for Clemson, that's less than your incoming freshman class, and so there's tigers scattered throughout a variety of populations, and they're dwindling dramatically. So now is our opportunity to really make a difference. India has around 1,400 to 1,700 tigers left. Russia has about 500, but their tigers are dwindling. So that's a big challenge that we're facing now.
And how many tigers were there 100 years ago?
100 years ago, there's 100,000. So if you look at it, 93% of tigers have gone out within the past 100 years, and they've lost 97% of their historic range has actually decreased over the past decade or past century.
And would that be true of elephants and other animals as well?
Yeah, elephants and rhinos as well in Africa are also facing these challenges. There's been, elephants have actually gone through a variety of ups and downs. They saw dramatic losses before the 80s, but then they saw an increase in population size, and now they're seeing a decrease as well. So I mean, other species across the world are also facing similar challenges.
And so if we can get back to the campus, so I assume you have faculty members involved in this as well. And if so, what are they doing? Yeah,
so the faculty advisors, they represent the institution itself and advise these student organizations on what they can do for tiger conservation efforts. But some of them have graduate students that are conducting research in tiger range countries and working with other organizations abroad. For example, Dr. David Tonkin at Clemson University just had a graduate student studying prey populations of tigers in Russia. Dr. Gomper at the University of Missouri has a graduate student working in Nepal as well. So they get involved in the research side of things, which is great, and also they help advise our clubs across the country.
And do you have trips? Do you go to Russia, or do you go to India, or do you go to parts of Africa?
Yeah, we actually we've had a fantastic relationship with that organization I was mentioning earlier, Tiger Trust, and we actually, every year we take students over to India to see exactly what's going on the ground. We did a really cool educational program with local high school students and collaborated with them, but also got to see, okay, these are the problems here on the ground that we're facing. So the students can take that experience back and that motivation and expand that knowledge and be like, look guys, this is really what we need to focus on. Let's put our efforts into international conservation efforts. And it's a great experience. I mean, it was fantastic this past year.
Interesting, but what happens if a government is not supportive of your efforts?
Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges that I think it's dependent on each country and the organization and objective that you're working in. There is some bit of a resistance sometimes between when non-governmental organizations try to work directly within countries. But I think it's really a balance, because I think it needs to be a priority of that country to take that lead role in the effort to protect and preserve those endangered species, or the species that are declining in population. So I think it's a balance of that and collaborating on your available resources and what you can provide to assist in that effort.
But let's say you were to get a meeting with the president of a country that's not particularly wealthy, and you were to say, Mr. and Mrs. President, Madam President, this is what we see, and we see that the tigers are dwindling, and the president says to you, Sean, that's great, but you know what, we have thousands of people starving, and we have to put our efforts in that. How would you address the president?
Yeah, exactly, and I want to expand that a little bit further. I mean, if we look at Asia now, I mean, India and China are the largest growing populations in the world, and they're facing tremendous economic concerns that you're mentioning. Poverty is a perfect example. How do we address animals and people at the same time? This is one of the big things that we challenge. So I think it's providing people with job opportunities and economic opportunities within these countries that can help assist and grow wildlife populations, whether that's through environmental protection programs by preserving your own land, or providing communities with proceeds from ecotourism efforts. I think that's another great approach that a lot of countries are taking advantage of. And I think all of those need to be considered. And that's one of the biggest challenges. So I think providing alternatives of livelihood for economic gain is the first thing to address.
And I wonder then, now that you're mentioning that, and I've thought about that a little bit, but I thought your point was just really interesting. I wonder if maybe you could form some sort of alliance with hospitality management departments in different universities around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about conservation in general, it's not just biology. It's everything. It's engineers, city planning, hospitality organizations, marketing professionals as well too, and changing this perception of wildlife. And I think that's a great opportunity, whether you can partner with schools and rural communities in tiger range countries through those academic departments, whether you're going to build a school and at the same time provide, try to get those communities actively engaged in tiger conservation. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Well, I was thinking about that because we did a segment a while ago on hospitality management, and one of the guests is a young American woman who, if I'm not mistaken, moved to Rwanda right after finishing university, and actually trains people how to get involved in the hospitality management arena, much of which in Rwanda, if I'm not mistaken, has to do with gorillas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's great, and I think that's exciting, you know, because it provides people with opportunities to be like, we care about wildlife through these economic gains and this hospitality industry. Yeah.
Well, what about courses that I would take? If I was a young student at Clemson University, and what courses would you recommend that I take to get involved?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of different courses that I think are applicable. You know, your basic conservation biology classes and getting a really good background and understanding of wildlife, what the role is of the United States in wildlife. But I also think if you're really interested in this field, I think you need to expand of what your average student may consider just to be conservation. I think you need to, students may want to consider marketing classes or communication classes to become a better advocate for some of these causes as well. So I think they also need to consider the broader perspective on things rather than just your basic conservation classes.
But let's say I was interested in picking a university because I was interested in conservation biology and others and other related subjects. I'm assuming you would not advise that we just go to Clemson or Missouri just because the tiger mascot. Are there universities that you would recommend that people think about because of how strong the conservation programs are?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of them across the country. I know Princeton has a great program, Yale has a good program, and I definitely recommend those. And you know, all those institutions, I'm assuming, may even have professionals and faculty and staff that are involved in tiger conservation or other conservation efforts that are of interest to that individual student. So it's not just tiger mascot schools, because we really need all the help that we can get.
And how do you interact with the U.S. government?
Yeah, so there's a variety of different things that we do to promote the efforts of the United States. So just a little bit of a background, we've worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is a service under the Department of Interior that manages the public lands of the United States, but also has a separate division designated to international conservation. So we've been working very close with that portion of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to promote some of their initiatives, one of which was a former stamp that you could actually purchase, a postal service stamp that you could purchase that actually raised funding for international conservation efforts, which was great. But unfortunately, that was discontinued last year. And you know, we can also work with them and work to promote with our senators and representatives in Congress certain policy reform initiatives that would benefit international conservation efforts.
And what would be some of those that you might think about?
Yeah, well, there's a variety of different things. And first of all, I'd like to say the United States has done extremely fantastic supporting international conservation efforts. President Obama just passed an executive order which basically put together a team of professionals within all agencies of the United States government to figure out what can we do to stop this poaching crisis that's occurring throughout the world. And one thing that we did there is we've provided public comments to where our students have written letters to senators in Congress and say, these are our concerns. We want you to address tigers in tiger range countries. Here's how, X, Y, and Z. And the response has been great. I mean, students have been getting responses back from their senators and representatives saying, I do care about this issue. This is a passion of mine, and we consider your recommendations. So.
And can you say a little bit more about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? So I'm not sure the average person knows much about it. So what's the jurisdiction? What do they do exactly?
Yeah, so, and I'll focus on the international conservation side. They do a variety of different things. They have a separate program called Wildlife Without Borders, which is federal funding that provides researchers at academic institutions or NGOs or private organizations to do their work, whether it's in tiger range countries or other countries across the world. So that's one thing. So they provide funding for people to find out more about what's going on. But at the same time, they work directly with countries and other agencies across the world of providing intel, training services to other agencies across the world as well.
So is there an equivalent of our agency in the United States in Rwanda or in India?
Yeah, absolutely. Most countries have a governing agency that manages their forest and wildlife departments. And they're all different depending upon the capacities, but also what the objectives are each of those individual countries.
And so, why don't we pick India, for example?
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that's where they protect or try to protect as many tigers as possible.
Right.
So, what does the Indian government do?
They've, in 1973, under Indira Gandhi, the prime minister at the time, she established Project Tiger, which is, she established 9 tiger reserves across the country, similar to what we have here in the United States with our national parks. Pockets of land that are able to provide ecotourism services to what we would consider the American public, and with the main objective of protecting tigers. And over the years, that's changed. Now the agency is called, I believe, the National Tiger Conservation Agency, providing reserves, pockets of reserves where tigers can thrive and they can focus their conservation efforts in those particular areas.
So in a lot of ways, this is also really an economic development initiative as well, because if you were building these entities of some sort, you would then build hotels, you would build an infrastructure so people could perhaps see the tigers in the wild without hurting them.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it's a challenge. If you look at different countries, ecotourism is of debate now in the conservation world, and some countries are doing it very well and other countries aren't. Objectively, yes, we would want to have ecotourism services where we can provide economic gains for communities surrounding these areas. For example, Nepal is doing it very, very well. This year, they've announced for the 2nd year in a row that they've never seen any poaching, which is incredible, of rhinos, elephants, and tigers. And what they've done is the proceeds that they've let's say you wanted to go into a park and you paid $100 to go visit Chitwan National Park. 50 cents to every dollar would go back into the community, which is great because it provides an economic incentive for the communities and also builds this, oh my gosh, these tigers are actually important because they're providing an economic gain for my family and so forth. But if you look at other countries, they're not as effective just because of constraints or conflicts that are occurring between these national parks and the local communities. Because tigers they're going to do what they want. They're not, you can't keep them within a designated area. And that's a big problem. One of the other reasons why tigers are going extinct is because there's no prey. So with no prey, there's nothing for the tigers to eat. So where do they look? They go outside of these buffer zones into the local communities and are now consuming cattle. So the livelihood that these communities depend on, cattle for milk and other sources, they're killing off these cattle. So it's causing a human-animal wildlife conflict between these national parks and the local communities. So it's dependent upon various countries.
And what about lions? How are lions faring?
Lions are a different case. They're declining as well, and one of the biggest concerns with lions are what are known as canned hunts. So what they'll actually do is they'll corral lions within a specific area, and people from across the world will actually go into these designated areas in Africa and pay a significant amount of money to shoot or take down one of these lions as a trophy animal, which is also causing a decline in their populations, and it's a big concern across Africa as well.
And that's legal?
Yeah. I think in some countries, yes, it is. And that's a big challenge. Some are using it as a conservation effort because if let's say you have a lion, for example, and you offer a potential client $50,000 to poach a lion. Sometimes, the hunter could come over and take down the lion, and that $50,000, some of that money could go towards conservation efforts to eventually protect these animals. But at the same time, sometimes that money doesn't go to the proper conservation resources. So it's a game,
Huh. And are there, let's say I wanted to get some background information about this in general. Are there some books that I could read?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're just interested in conservation, and I recommend this to a lot of students, but also the American public as well. It's a fantastic book called The Sand County Almanac by Stephen J. Gould. And he is, Aldo Leopold, apologize. He's considered the godfather of wildlife conservation, and he writes about the American landscape and how we are connected to nature. But in wildlife conservation, if you're looking abroad internationally, there's a variety of resources. National Geographic is great. The International Fund of Animal Welfare is great. WWF is a great resource as well too to start learning about these issues at hand. And also, television shows are starting to become more apparent of generating these issues as well.
And what about for younger students? Let's assume that some high school students or perhaps even younger students are interested in this. What do you recommend that they do?
Yeah, visiting your local zoo. I think that's a great start. Accredited zoos, and I think that really, for me, also growing up, established a big passion of mine. I loved going to zoos. I could sit in front of an exhibit for hours at a time, and from there, getting involved in their educational programs. A lot of zoos offer that opportunities, but also becoming more aware of what are some things that I care about, and developing those passions along the way. But I think zoos are a great start because they offer educational opportunities, but to see and educate yourselves on wildlife.
Well, do people in Europe look at zoos the same way that we do?
No, and there was a recent case. I don't know if you recalled. A giraffe was taken out of an exhibit, and they slaughtered the giraffe and fed it to a lion and used it as an educational opportunity for students. And it caused a big uproar here in the United States as this is what you shouldn't do. And the role of zoos are different between countries. How we see conservation is very different in the United States than we do in Copenhagen as well. So they're different roles, but I think the main goal of educating the public is the same, and I think that's what's great and fantastic about zoos.
And what would you recommend for professors? Let's if we can get back to the campus for a second. So how should professors get involved?
Yeah, give us a call. I think that's great. Professors, they've had tremendous amount of resources and access into the world. Through connections at their own institutions as well. And a lot of our academic advisors are now starting to collaborate, which is great. And looking into opportunities within their own departments and getting involved in research and incorporating graduate students, I think that's great.
And what about academic journals? Are there any academic journals that I could read?
Yeah, conservation biology is great. Nature and Science are also great. Those are your premier journals, and they're definitely worth taking a look into on what's going on, what's the big things going on in conservation biology and nature as well. Although they cover a variety of topics, I think they're also a great start to spark interest. And
what worries you the most?
That we're not taking advantage of this opportunity. I think that's my biggest concern. We really don't have a lot of time, and I hate saying that, but we really don't. So now's the time where we need to say, okay, are we going to tackle this problem? Here's how, and let's all collaborate. And I think that's another biggest thing is we need to all just sit down and collaborate on these issues. We're just starting to learn about these things. Although conservation biology has been around for decades, we're just starting to learn about the human dimensions aspect of conservation and working together, I think. But
now, what do you mean by the human dimension?
Yeah, so going back to that example of how tigers are going into local communities and disrupting them in their livelihoods. We never used to think of conservation in that sense. We used to focus conservation on a particular species. So we would say, tigers, we're going to focus on tigers. But we also need to realize that we need to focus on the other aspects of the broader perspective of conservation. So that includes your local communities and economic development and addressing these political concerns as well. So,
fair enough. What are some schools? What are some of the other Tiger for Tiger schools?
Yeah, so we got 56 of them, which is great, which is fantastic. So let's take Towson, for example, right here in Maryland. Towson, they recently formed this year, and they've done a lot of really good things. They established a showcase on campus to talk about these issues. They just did a presentation for Earth Day as well, and they're getting more involved, fundraising for tiger conservation efforts. Other campuses, they do 5Ks. They have 5Ks where they get community members involved and raise awareness for the cause as well. So 5Ks are great. Hosting movies and seminars are also great too to educate the public.
And do you have any national conferences or regional conferences?
Yeah, we just came off of our second annual national summit that was held at the University of Missouri. And the goal of the summit is to bring together students from across the country who are either involved in Tigers for Tigers or of interest, and say, look, here's what we can do. Let's rally the troops. Let's get together and figure out what we can do to get involved. It's a great networking opportunity for students to see that there's other students across the country that are passionate and care. It's another network opportunity for professors to collaborate on these issues, and once again, to pull in experts in the field and learn about what's actually going on.
Well, fair enough. Sean, we only have another minute or so left. Is there anything that you would like to leave viewers with that perhaps we didn't address today?
Yeah, I think, once again, now's our opportunity to really make a difference in acts. If you care about wildlife, if you care about conservation, now's the time to raise your voice. Now's the time to contact your congressman and address, say, hey, I care about these wildlife issues. I think that's a really great resource of advising your congressman on these issues. You can find resources for us on our website as well to give you a good start. But let's focus on getting the American public involved and say this is something we care about and we can really make a difference.
And what about for people who are watching this overseas? What do you recommend that they do?
Look at your local forest or forest departments or your other governing agencies that are involved in wildlife conservation and ask what you can do. If there's local NGOs within the area, getting in contact with them and either volunteering as well as another great opportunity to find out more.
Well, terrific. Sean, thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
If you would like additional information about Sean Carnell, please visit t4tcoalition.org. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.